Welcome back to my channel. And today's video is the fourth in a series of 5 videos of empowering keynotes for each of the human design types. And today we're going to talk about manifestors. Manifestors are only about 8 to 9% of the population, but they are so vital for the functioning really of society. They are the only type that's designed to initiate. And I know a lot of us were trained to be manifestors, but oddly enough, manifestors were often trained to be generators. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. So empowering keynote number 1 is to honor and to follow your creative impulses and your inner guidance. As I said a moment ago, manifestors are the only type that are designed to initiate. And yet, oddly enough, a lot of times they're conditioned to act more like generators. It sort of seems like no matter what type you get slotted into some box that isn't exactly the right one for you. So for manifestors, it's important that they actually honor that creative impulse that they have, the inner guidance that they have that's coming from the motor that's connected to the throat. Now, I go into this in a lot more detail in the video I did on life purpose for manifestors. So you can check that one out if you want to know more details about the motor to the throat. But what makes a manifestor is, number one, they're not a sacral being, which means their sacral is not defined. That what would be a red square down at the bottom is white on their chart. And number 2, they have one of 3 motors going to the throat. So they don't have the sacral, which is one of the motors. So they either have the emotional solar plexus, the will center, or the root, which always will go up through the spleen unless it goes through the emotional solar plexus. But in any event, they have one of those connected to the throat. And each one of those motors has its own quality. So the emotional solar plexus, right, is what it sounds like. It's emotional, right? But it's a very powerful energy. The will center is also part of the heart center, and it's has the will, but it also has value. It's sometimes called the ego center. And then the root is rooted, right? And the thing about the root is it does go up through the spleen, so it can pick up some of that splenic energy, which can either be intuition or it can be instinct, depending on how you're expressing it. So without going into all that detail, you can go watch that one on Life Purpose if you want more detail about it. Simply the point is that manifestors are designed to receive and to act upon the creative impulses that come to them from whatever motor it is that they have that's defined that connects to their throat. Many manifestors are also highly intuitive in other ways. So you can take a look at your chart and see how much of the knowing circuit you have or how much of the sensing circuit you have, particularly the gate 57, which is known as a highly intuitive gate. But really there's intuition all throughout both of those circuits. So you can go and check out what you might have in your chart that is in those 2 different circuits and get to know what that definition is as well, because that could also be influencing you. But the main point is that manifestors are designed to receive intuition or receive these impulses and then to go ahead and act on them. In initiating, manifestors are here to create waves of possibility. So they receive these creative impulses, this intuition, and then they go ahead and they act on it. And as they do that, they create ripples, and it gives people like me, generators or manifesting generators or projectors or even reflectors, something to respond to, or we get invited into things, we get recognized, or we just start to see, oh, this is happening in my outer reality. How am I going to engage with that, right? And so manifestors are like the prow of a ship, right? Moving through the ocean and then creating waves that the rest of us all get to respond to. So if a manifestor isn't out there initiating, then it really inhibits the rest of us from being able to utilize our strategy. So please go ahead and initiate. Related to this is empowering keynote number 2, which is to have the courage to be yourself, to own your power, your value, the contributions that you came here to make. As I said a moment ago, sometimes manifestors have really gotten a bad rap because they do tend to kind of get an idea and go for it, right? And sometimes it's, like you could think of little kids in school and how that goes over, right? It's like, no, go ahead and sit down and pay attention. What do you mean you saw something outside that you want to go and, get involved in? It's like, no, this is school time, go ahead and sit down. Or it's time for bed and you get really interested in, a creative project or something. And mom's like, no, honey, it's like bedtime. You got to go to bed. I don't care if you have a creative project. You got to go to bed. Right. So this is how manifestors sometimes have gotten, kind of squelched in terms of their ability to follow those inner impulses that they have, their own creativity. And so you pay attention if there's ways in which you stifle yourself or confine yourself to smaller versions of who you really could be. And who you could show up as in the world and really like unleash yourself. I love that to say that to everybody, really, but especially for manifestors, like you really need to unleash yourself from boxes that other people have put you in and that you may be now keeping yourself in, because we need you to have that courage to be yourself. And as I said a moment ago, to go out and do that initiating so that the rest of us have things to respond to. You're really designed for leadership and you need to utilize it. Okay, you're here to create an impact. You're here to be influential. You're here to, as Steve Jobs once said, poke a hole in the universe, right? And see what happens. So have the courage to go ahead and be yourself. Now, having said those things, there's a few other elements here that are going to really help you to empower yourself in your life, but to do it in a way that is really effective and satisfying and where you won't burn yourself out. Okay, so the next one is, yes, be aware of your impact. Be aware of your impact and use it wisely. Having that motor to the throat is a huge superpower, and other people are going to feel your energy. Manifestors are generally among the people when they walk in a room, you're like, oh, what's that energy? I can feel that energy all the way over here, right? And so with that much power, okay, comes a lot of responsibility, right? It's the old Spider-Man thing, right? It's like with great power comes great responsibility. And so the question I want to pose to you is, will you harness and direct that energy where you want it to go? Or will it act without your direction? Because the thing is you can't not have that power unless you work really, 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 really hard to damp yourself down. And you make yourself sick that way. So don't do that. But you may have done that if you were, like I said, put in that box a lot of times and you felt like, oh, that's what I really need to do to be appropriate and to fit in and to be loved and be acceptable, right? Like, I get that. Like, the conditioning is hard. And as you start to let yourself out of that box, right, then all of a sudden you have all this power. Or if you never put yourself in the box, it may be that some of that manifestor energy has kind of just been knocking you around and you haven't really known how to get a hold of it. So it's important that you learn that you do have this incredible manifesting power and that you get to know yourself better. Because the thing is if you're not being aware of your impact, if you're not being aware of your influence, and if your energy is just kind of bouncing around and doing all kinds of things, it can really influence and impact people in a way that might feel controlling. It might feel coercive. You might be even doing those things, but it might be unconscious. Like, you might not be purposefully doing that, right? It just might be a consequence of the power of your energy and how you're moving through the world. So you do want to be aware of your impact, be aware of your influence. And you want to be able to take all that power you've got and direct it where you want it to go so that it is purposeful, so it is making a positive impact in the world. I heard Ra, the founder of Human Design, once talking about the manifestor strategy. So he was an ego manifestor, and he said that he really kind of came up with the strategy which was to inform. And he said it's not like the other strategies for the other types, which are really based more on their own, the configuration of their design. He said it really doesn't have anything to do with that. He said it has to do with what he experienced as a manifester of people getting angry with him, upset with him, because he was just kind of moving through his life. I think of like the bull in the china shop, right? He was just kind of moving through his life, and he was, knocking people over or leaving and not telling anybody where he was. He tells this story about when he was a little kid. He had this impulse. He wanted to go out into the forest. So he left. He was like little. He was like 6 or something. He just left the house and went out into the forest, and he was out in the forest all day long. And his mother didn't know where he was, and she got really worried about him. She didn't know what happened to him. She called everybody and was trying to find out what was going with him. And when he finally came home, when it got dark, like many, many hours later, she was really upset with him because she was like, "Where were you? What was happened? You didn't tell me where you were going." So that's a story that he tells about what can happen with manifestors. And he said, I needed to learn that what I do is actually impacting other people. And that it's really pretty simple just to kind of let people know what I'm doing. This isn't really about asking for permission, can I please, which is kind of what, you have to do as a kid, right? Can I please? But it's more about recognizing that there are people in what we call your impact field, right? They're going to be people who are influenced and impacted by what you do. And so when you let people know what you're doing, like in that situation, if he had just told his mom, Mom, I'm going to go out and play in the woods. And she might have said, okay, but be back for lunch or whatever, right? She may have put some kind of parameters around it, but she wouldn't have worried the same way. And so I've worked with manifestors as clients who have really had to kind of work with what does informing mean, where I'm not just subordinating myself and asking permission, as if I'm not in command of my life. But I also want to be able to let people know what's happening. And part of this is when you're really like in bonded relationships, whether that's with your kids or your parents or your beloveds, your really good friends, your partner, whoever it is that we also want to take into account how other people are impacted by what we do. This is just kind of good relationship etiquette. And it's not, again, that we want to certainly cut away parts of ourselves that are important to try to make somebody else feel okay. It doesn't mean that. But for example, if your partner, just to continue on with this example that Ra had given, is if your partner was like, let's say her dad left when she was 2 and she never saw him again, right? And she has this abandonment wound, right? Which she's probably worked on, healed to some degree. But when you just kind of disappear and don't tell her where you're going, or you tell her where you're going, but you come back like 2 days later instead of 2 hours later, right? Her abandonment wound might get activated. Right. And so just out of your love and your care for her, you're going to be informing her and letting her know what you're doing. Again, it's not that you're just asking permission. It's just that you're taking into account the other people in your life who are meaningful for you. Right. I mean, I was in a business relationship with a manifestor once who just made a decision to go on a business trip right in the middle of when we were doing a major conference and project together. And I just was like, "You're doing what?" Like, I couldn't believe, I was flabbergasted that he would have done that. And then he didn't even talk to me about it ahead of time to say, "You know what? I realize we're right in the middle of this. Is this going to work? What do you think?" Like, he didn't even bring it up. He didn't tell me he was going to do it until he was already gone. And I was just like, wow. So that's not a good way to work in relationship with people, right? It's not that he had to ask my permission, but it would have been good for us to have had a conversation about it and to have talked through, well, how can we have this not have a major negative impact either on the project we were working on or on me, right? Because I was kind of left holding the bag. So be aware of your impact and use it wisely. Empowering keynote number 4 is to give yourself time. Now, this might sound a little contradictory, but I have found that this can be super helpful for manifestors, particularly for if you're emotionally defined or if your spleen is defined, because the spleen also is about timing. Anything having to do with the emotional solar plexus is always about timing. And also if you have much of the integration circuit, because the integration circuit also needs time. If you have any of those in your chart, defined in your chart, then this is especially true for you. But I think it could be true really for manifestors in general. Just before, if you get an impulse, maybe just pause at least for a moment to be like, okay, is this really the right time? It might not even be like, is it the right thing? But it might be more, is it the right time? And so giving yourself a chance to get clear about that and to tune into your authority, whatever that is for you. And it'll differ for you depending on what your particular configuration is as a manifestor. But you may not want to just rock it as soon as you get an idea. And again, this is not about asking permission. It's not about putting yourself in a box. It's not about dumbing yourself down or any of that. It is just about recognizing that those creative impulses that come from a motor have power behind them, because that's the point. It's coming from a motor, right? So it's going to have power behind it. And it may feel like you've got this impetus to say, go now. And the thing is it might not exactly be the right time. Even though the impulse came, it might not be exactly the right time. So do yourself a favor. And sometimes, and I'm not necessarily saying wait a year or something, but practice and to tune in to see, okay, when is the right time? When is my body saying, oh yeah, that's it? What is my authority saying? Because you can get a creative impulse and it's not necessarily fully formed. It's not necessarily ripe, right? For going for it. It might need some more gestation time. It might need some more development, right? Other people or outer circumstances might need to get ready so that they can meet you when you're coming forward with your idea. Right. And so again, I've had situations with manifestors where, ideas that they had were really great, but they were trying to force it through because they had this impulse, but it wasn't the right time. Right. And it kind of created a disaster, honestly. So I want you to honor your impulses. I want you to have the courage to be who you are. I want you to go for it and use your impact wisely. But part of being wise is knowing and being able to discern right timing. And finally, empowering keynote number 5 is to take care of yourself and your energy. Now, here's the thing. Manifestors are a so-called energy type, right? Because they do have a motor to the throat. And they do have a lot of energy. They do have a lot of power. But they do not have a sacral, which defined. So that means that they do not have that long-term, sustainable, always there, consistent energy for themselves, the way that generators and manifesting generators, if they take care of themselves and live in alignment with their design, that they will, right? Yet manifestors live in a generator world. 70% of the population have a defined sacral. So that means that manifestors are always picking up and amplifying generator energy, that sacral energy, right? And the thing is because they already have a lot of energy, that can just be like, that can feel really juicy to them. And they can want to ride on that energy. And it's important to learn how to differentiate between the energy that you have as a manifestor, separate from all the generators, and what it feels like when you're taking in that sacral energy and amplifying it and riding on it, okay? You want to be able to tell the difference, because taking in that generator energy and amplifying and riding on it, you only want to do for like periods of time, ideally short periods of time. And you can be really seduced by that much energy. But the thing is that it'll blow your circuits over time. I mean, it'll just really waste you over time. I've known 2 different manifestors really quite well. Okay, 2 different men, high-powered men who both were like on the couch in their 50s. like literally were burned out. One of them so bad, his chronic fatigue was so bad, he was really pretty non-functional for like a couple of years. Okay, that it was that bad. The other one definitely highly fatigued, and he was able to function, more or less, right? But he was really burned out. And so you don't want to do that to yourself. Like, don't do that. And so some of the ways that you can avoid that as a manifestor, one thing, and Ra used to say this for everybody, but especially for projectors and for manifestors and reflectors, the non-energy types, is to sleep alone. Okay. And especially do not sleep with a generator or a manifesting generator, because if you do, you're constantly being bombarded by that generator energy, right? So if you can, to sleep alone and or take time away from generator types. Like, make sure that you have time when you're not being bombarded by that generator energy, so it can drain out of your system and you can really replenish yourself. You want to get to know the pattern of the motor that you have that's defined, that goes to the throat. So for example, the emotional solar plexus always has a wave, right? And so if you have that defined, you're going to have an emotional wave, and you want to be able to rest and take it easy and kind of be more introverted when you're low on your wave. Okay. So the will center, the mantra for the will center is that it works to rest, right? It really needs rest. It doesn't have sustainable energy. It's willpower. You can use willpower for a period of time. It can give you energy, but if you try to do it all the time, you're going to fry yourself. And then the root has an on-off pulse. Okay. And if you've got the root powering your throat, it's going to be going up through the spleen. So it's kind of going a long way from the root all the way up to the throat, right? And it's going through another center. So it doesn't have as much power as if you just have that will center or the emotional solar plexus going to the throat. So you can just be checking this out for yourself and seeing what motor you have to the throat and what pattern of energy does it have, and to honor that. And one of the ways you can do this, just for sure, is to rest before you're exhausted. Like, don't have a pattern of engagement where, you're just full on and then you're like, oh my God, I've just got to, right? You don't want to do that, get rest, build rest into your life before you get really tired. If you're emotionally defined, and you're low on your wave, or if you've got your will center defined, if you've been, really kind of powering through something before you hit the wall, rest, right? And notice if it's the root, is it like, do I have a lot of energy right now or not? Because that's what the root does. It kind of goes, boop, right? And so honor the way that your energy works. Get to know what's true for you. And in order to do that, you have to not be like in generator energy all the time. I just have to say, we generators, we generate, right? We generate a lot of power. And so you want to be mindful of that and how it can be influencing you. And if you are a manifestor and you would like to understand more about how these specifics work in your own human design, I encourage you to come and have a reading with me. Readings are 90 minutes. They're in-depth. They're followed by a half an hour integration session where you get to come back and get coaching and get to ask questions and have me respond to you. And then also you get a 75-page ebook called Transform Your Life with Human Design that will tell you all about the different strategies and authorities and the types and definition and openness and incarnation crosses. It's got a lot. It's packed with a lot, and it's beautiful. It's 4 colors. It's gorgeous, and it'll really help you kind of dig more into human design. It also has a companion volume called the Deep Dive Journal that'll help you apply what you learn to your own human design. So I decided to start giving this to the people who get readings with me, because I find that it gives them a really solid foundation in human design before they come and get their readings with me, and it's something that they can refer to a lot later on. Okay, so I encourage you to do that. And if you enjoyed the video, please go ahead and give it a like, subscribe. I would love to hear any comments that you have. what's worked for you or not worked for you as a manifestor or as somebody who has loved a manifestor, or anything else that has really gotten stirred up by what I've shared in this video. Okay, many blessings, much love.